Okay, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. I know kind of once we get into December, it gets really hard for people to break away from other activities that are going on, so we appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. And we have a pretty full agenda, so we'll see how long things take. If we're out a little bit early, that's fine, but I don't know that we will be this time. And so, first of all, before we do anything else, I just wanted to acknowledge that my boss, Val Hale, is here today. And actually, I don't think that you've had a proper introduction to this group. So we're very appreciative of you being here. And if you want to take maybe just a minute or two to just talk about yourself and GoEd and, you know, just the office in general, I think that would be greatly appreciated. I know.
Well, you know, one of the great things about being in this position, I've been here almost a year and a half now, is we have a phenomenal team. I'm surrounded with great people, and Kelly is one of those. We were really fortunate last year in the legislature to get the legislature to revive these positions and keep them going, and we're extremely fortunate that Kelly agreed to stay on. We see great things here. We like to point to the locate.utah.gov website as really one of the innovative things that our office has done. It's won a lot of accolades, and I think it's a phenomenal tool. So we look to this office to continue to do good things. I think we all know the economy today is driven by broadband, the internet, and what goes on there. If a community or a family doesn't have access to that, you know, it's going to put them way behind. So thanks for all the good work you do for keeping the state functioning. I know we rank very highly on all kinds of things in terms of speed, in terms of access, in terms of you name it. And so it's a pleasure to live in a state where there's so much attention paid to this and so many good people working. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, and it's been great to have Val on board. He's been really supportive of our efforts, and he's been a great resource for this office. And so he's going to be here probably for about half the meeting and just kind of listen in. And he's, like I said, he's never had a chance to meet with us, so this is great. So the first thing on the agenda, we're actually going to have a bit of a spotlight on All West Communications today. Jack Walkenhorst has agreed to give us kind of a little bit of an introduction to what they do. Last time we had AmeriCom, and so this time we're going to just hear from All West Communications for a few minutes. I'll have you hold the microphone, maybe. Does that work? Thanks, Jen. At the front, yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about All West. Standing in front of people is not my favorite thing. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. But I've done it off and on for a lot of years, and maybe it gets a little easier. I don't know. Thought I'd just... Okay, yep, there we go. Tell you a little bit about who All West is. We're a local telecommunications company. We've been in business since 1912. We're located in our headquarters. We're in Camas, Utah, which is in Summit County. We also serve into Wasatch County and Rich counties in Utah, as well as Uinta and southern Lincoln counties in Wyoming. Kind of the northeast part of Utah and the southwest part of Wyoming. The original owners, their grandson now owns the company. He's owned the company for over 50 years. He bought just the company from his grandfather in 1962. So it is still... he was actually born and raised in Rich County. The company started in Woodruff-Randolph area, as many of the independents did when the larger RBOX was not filled into the areas where it was needed. We also are a competitive carrier in Summit and Wasatch and as well here in Utah. We provide all telephony services. All the telephony services, high-speed internet, video, cable TV, business, IT services, hosted. point-to-point dedicated circuits, Ethernet services, all these services for both residents and businesses. We just try to keep services at the edge of what is coming next, not right on the edge. We've been on the edge, and that's sometimes a painful place to be. So we backed off a little bit, but still keeping it right to the edge. We've provided fiber optic services right to the home and the business for over 16 years now. And we've engineered, built, maintained, and upgraded, and continue to expand that fiber network. And with aggressive build-outs and also gigabit services. We have local offices in most of the areas that we serve, so that our customers can come in and talk to us face-to-face, or any other medium that they may choose. We have Facebook pages. They can connect with us there, email, text, whatever they would like. We also run our own call center. So if a customer, potential customer, wants to get a hold of us after regular business hours, 24/7, when they call in, they're going to be talking to an all-West employee. Our employees usually live right in the areas where they work, and so they are part of the community at work and also after work. We have various partners, as all of you I'm sure do. We work closely with the communities in which we serve, with city government and county government. That's one of my main focuses. I've been with the company for a long time, but about a year ago took a shift so that I could do more of these things face-to-face with different groups. We work closely with economic development directors in our areas, so that we know what's going on, what services are needed, so that we can have those services to those areas when and where they're needed. We work also with private companies and partnerships, anchor institutions, schools, libraries, hospitals, and also we try to be very involved in the communities that we serve. We sponsor local events, we sponsor scholarships with high school students, high school sports, all of those things. As a company, our goal is to provide and keep our customers connected, informed, and entertained. Our vision is to provide a global communication services with the care and attention that you would expect from a local company. And you know, in our areas as well as many rural areas, people say, oh, you're so lucky to live here, and I really believe that we are. But also trying to provide the same services. You know, we have remote areas within our serving boundaries. Forest Service, BLM, some of the areas that we serve are multiple miles of dirt roads. But people will come into those areas to vacation or to get away, but they still want connectivity. They still want to be able to do the things that they need to do. And they're often surprised at the services that we can provide them in those areas. But it's All West is a great company. As I said, I've been with them for a long time. And I'm just, I'm grateful to be able to take a few minutes and share that with you. Any questions? As far as employees, probably about 55. Residential and business, probably just under 10,000. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. We're not looking to go necessarily outside of our areas, but just expanding within the areas that we currently serve in. And reaching out, we get inquiries every day. Can you provide service here? So just, trying to reach out along the Wasatch back and work in those areas. Anything else? Most of what we have is Cisco. Yeah, Metaswitch as far as telephony. Most of our internet is Cisco backbone. Yeah.
Yeah, so we thought, traditionally we haven't had, the providers be able to kind of present as much in this group, so we're excited to kind of have just a quick overview of some of the companies because they're obviously a huge resource for people at the table. So thank you for giving us a quick overview. And I have forgotten to do introductions, so let's go around the room and do that really quickly. So we've met Val, obviously. So Tara, if you want to, and could you turn on the microphones for a second while we do introductions, and then we'll go to the phone after we go around the room. So Tara, go for it. All right.
My name is Sharon Bertelson, and I work at law firm of Ballard Law.
Shirley Silversmith, Utah Division of Indian Affairs.
Steve Proctor with Utah Communications. Gordon Bowles with Utah Communications Authority. Dennis Sampson of Utah Education and Telehealth Network.
Meredith John Saralakis Incorporated for URCA. Dave Ryan with Strata Networks. Ryan Marriott, Americom Technology.
Bill Duncan, Utah Business Public Utilities.
Charles Baldwin with Bitstream Communications.
Scotty John with the Big Cottonwood Canyon Community Outfit.
Sharon Peters with Square.
Lynn Beecher with Sky Fiber. Glenn Reichert with the National Broadband Applications Program, US Ignite.
So expert, talk loudly so the mic can pick you up.
Roland Yoshinaki with Sully County Township.
Okay, and then I think we had some people on the phone. If you could let us know who you are.
Kelly, this is Georgianne Weidenbach with CenturyLink.
Okay.
This is Mike Hurd with Americom Technology.
Okay.
Sabrina Scott with UETN. And by the way, the audio is really horrible from your end.
Is it? We'll have to talk closer to the microphone. Does that help?
Yeah, we can hear you. I can hear you fine, Kelly, but almost everyone else is every other syllable.
Okay, so we'll just be careful to put microphones near us while we're talking. Thanks, Sabrina.
Ralph Okerlund, Utah State Senate.
Sorry, who is that?
Senator Ralph Okerlund.
Senator Okerlund? Okay, great. Thank you.
Good morning, Kelly. This is Joey Perry with the U.S. Forest Service.
Anyone else? Okay, great. Okay, well, I just wanted to start out, we have a lot of sort of federal updates and updates for the program. Val mentioned very briefly, but I don't know if we've mentioned it in this particular meeting, but the locate.utah.gov site actually recently won a national award. So we won a Digital Government Award in the Government to Business category. So we had submitted a nomination. And so that's kind of a great thing just to get a little bit of national attention for our website. And again, we appreciate everybody that's submitted information to contribute to that effort. And we want to continue to promote that resource. I've done a lot of kind of traveling around the state showing local economic development groups that tool, but as you have ideas on ways that we should continue to market that site so that people know which services are available, we definitely love to hear feedback on that. Also, there are several things going on as far as national proposed legislation. I put a printout on the table. We did a blog post that kind of went over a few sort of pending pieces of legislation, but I'm just going to mention them briefly. And so we have, first of all, there's the Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2015. and it would direct the FCC to submit plans for the auction of certain bands of spectrum frequencies to Congress. And I think that what we're seeing, we haven't seen Congress propose a lot in the last couple of years, but that's definitely heated up in the last few months. So if you look on our blog, on this blog post that we have printed out, if you click on the links, that'll show you the actual pieces of legislation. And we definitely encourage, especially providers, to kind of read through those. And if there's any specific feedback that you think that my office should be aware of, any concerns, sometimes we're asked about different issues, and so it's good to kind of know how the stakeholders are feeling. There's also the Broadband Conduit Deployment Act that proposes to include broadband in certain highway construction projects. And as we know, Utah does similar practices extensively through UDOT. And I know that UDOT has been sort of looking at this legislation to see if it would impact anything that they currently do. But as please read through it. And like I said, let us know if you have any comments. Just send them, just shoot me an email, and I'll kind of collect them so that we're kind of tracking that. There's also another piece of legislation, the Historic Review of Broadband Facilities, which is intended to provide for streamlining of consideration by the Department of Interior, and so the Forest Service, the Department of Defense, to locate or modify broadband facilities. And so that's kind of dealing with some of the right-of-way issues, I believe. And so look through that one. There's also another piece of proposed legislation, the inventory of federal assets, that would create an inventory of, I believe it's like federal buildings or things that you could possibly utilize for wireless installations. So look at that piece of legislation. And I know that there have been several conversations on a national level about coming up with some sort of inventory that shows, federal buildings that could be utilized for broadband. And then there's also another piece of legislation called just pole attachments that would make changes to regulations with pole attachments. And then there's also, in addition to the congressional proposed legislation, the FCC also issued last week an order on reconsideration that deals with pole attachments. And I know that there is state regulation on pole attachments as well. And so we definitely want to pay attention to what's going on federally and see how that kind of impacts state rules. And so we would encourage you, especially with this order on reconsideration, that if you have comments, to submit them to the FCC so that they're aware of any concerns. And I don't know if anybody has any comments on any of those pieces that I've mentioned just out the gate. I don't know if people have been watching them, tracking them. Okay, perfect. And then a few other things.
One other question.
Yes.
On pole attachments, because I design power lines and now fiber on them, this is really critical.
Yep.
This is really important, and we need to be aware and make sure that government doesn't get their hands on this. I mean, I have to have a franchise agreement to work with St. George City, and that's because it's not Rocky Mountain Power.
Okay.
With Rocky Mountain Power, it's not difficult. But when you start getting into some of these smaller cities, it can get very difficult.
Okay. And one thing that would be useful, it would be useful on issues like that if you just shot me a quick email about like things that you've seen that you've liked cities do, because I'll sometimes have a city call me and say, what are other cities doing that's working well? And so we're a really good venue for kind of disseminating best practices. And so as you see things that are working or not working, when I get calls, it's useful to have a few examples to send back. And we can kind of include that in some of our presentations. We present pretty regularly to cities and counties, and we like to talk about some of those best practices. So. And then there are a few other things going on. So first of all, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration in the Department of Congress, they actually were the agency that handled our federal grant when we were a federal grant program. They've sort of been adjusting their role. They're still really interested in working with the states and coordinating with states that have broadband offices. And right now, about half the states have continued with the broadband offices. And so they are sort of playing a facilitating role in bringing states together still. But they also are interested in providing kind of resources to the states that have broadband programs. And so they've been sort of issuing reports and trying to disseminate information that they think would be useful. And one of the things that they just released, and I printed some copies out, they did a guide to federal funding of broadband projects. And so what they did is they went through and they just kind of did a grand list of different federal agencies that have programs that could fund broadband. And it's interesting, so NTIA was kind of in the works doing this original document. And then at the same time, there also, as many of you know, there is a new, it's called the Broadband Opportunity Council that the White House has been heading up. And so what they did was they essentially formed sort of an advisory council where they brought together, I think, 25 federal agencies and asked them to look at all of their policies, all of their funding buckets, and to make some determinations about programs that make determinations about policies that would reduce regulations to broadband providers, and then also any funding buckets that could also feasibly be used for broadband. And so these federal agencies have been kind of reviewing their own funding opportunities and trying to make it a little bit more explicit if a particular program would qualify for broadband, because right now I think people have been sort of applying and not sure if broadband is an eligible funding expense. And so they released the Broadband Opportunity Council report and recommendation. And so we have these two funding documents. The NTIA one came out, and then the Broadband Opportunity Council came out, which was sort of changes. And so this is a little bit more recent, and so they don't completely sync up, but they give you a really good starting point to see, especially the Opportunity Council will show you recent changes and clarifications for funding. I've been a little bit involved in giving some feedback on the Broadband Opportunity Council, and actually in September I was invited to the White House to meet with the Broadband Opportunity Council to talk about some of these recommendations. And a few of the things that I focused on were especially with the Department of the Interior, some of the issues that people have been having with permitting on federal lands. I kind of mentioned representing the western states, being in the room. I kind of said, you know, we really would like to see some attention to that area because the time frames and the expense sometimes is a real barrier. And so it was very nice to be invited. It was nice to have Utah at the table, and so we've been trying to kind of foster that relationship just so that we have a little bit of a voice, so that they know how we feel about things. So if you have any, they're still continuing with that effort. So if you see anything in the report or anything that you'd like me to forward on, I have some contacts in DC that I can forward information to. And then let's see. The other thing that happened recently, within the last week or two, the FCC released all of the raw broadband data that the companies had submitted through the Form 477. There's been a lot of debate. Well, there was a lot of conversation. We had originally assumed that they were going to release another national broadband map that was housed with the FCC. And it doesn't look like that is happening. It looks like what they've done is they've just released raw data. And so all of the information that you've given us as a project, as a program that's gone onto the Utah broadband map, we're still continuing our broadband map so that you'll have an interface where you can see the data. And most of the companies are submitting more refined data than the Form 477. And so our state map will continue to be a resource for broadband data, but they have released that federal information, and I think they're just going to be releasing raw files, so you'd have to kind of go in and sort it out. But the data that we have should be sufficient for anything that you would need. And then just one last thing, many of you attended our Broadband Summit. Thank you for participating in that. I think that one of the things that I noticed, I think our numbers were down a little bit because it was the week of UEA. And I think that was kind of a lesson learned for somebody that didn't grow up in Utah, that that it was a little bit tricky to get people the day before UEA started. So we'll keep that in mind for future events. But we heard some great feedback on the content was fantastic. The presentations were great. And we actually have put all of the videos from the summit up on our website. So if you had conflicts and wanted to look at any of the presentations, and we appreciate Emory Telecom did the filming of the event, and we really appreciate them sending their camera crew and filming them so that we can continue to learn from the great presentations that we had. Now that I think I've covered all of my updates, and so the next thing that we wanted to do, we're going to
I have one additional update.
Yes, please.
So, people remember the FCC Model Cities program? A few of you? The FCC is interested in having some model cities try out some new wireless strategies. And that program has been kind of in the mud, not getting much traction. They've begun to work with the NTIA and with US Ignite and are looking for some interesting ideas to get that model cities program moving again. If you have some ideas for how wireless could impact Utah in interesting ways, please let me know. You can get in touch with me through Kelly, and I would like to feed that back to get that national program started again and perhaps active in Utah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And actually, if you send me information, I can send it out on the blog too.
Well, this is the background stage where the
okay.
federal agencies are trying to figure out what it is they might want to present as a program.
Okay.
And of course, the best way to have a good program is to tell them what to have
right.
the program to do.
Okay.
So this is the input stage.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other quick updates that they wanted to cover before we go on to the next item? Okay, so the next thing, we're going to have Bert come up and talk a little bit. We're talking about making a few changes to the interface for the residential broadband map, and so he's going to talk just a little bit about that.
All right, I got keep my notes here. So this is our state broadband.
Oh, Jeff is. Oh, no, I think that was and now it's really weird.
Technology Council.
It only happens.
All right. We're in business.
Okay.
So, if I remember correctly, I think it was February. February.
I can't hear the speaker at all.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on.
So, it's the end of January in 2010. No, 2000. I'm sorry. Over. Okay, I got it. So it was the end of January in 2011 when we launched the state broadband map. So in January of 2016, in a few months, we'll have been in business for 5 years, and we've made some incremental changes over the period. But the map has been public. But for the most part, it's provided the data using the original strategy that we developed 5 years ago. And there are a couple of changes to how we're collecting data that we'd like to see reflected in this map. But after really trying to come up with a better way to present the data, we really came up mostly with a few small tweaks that are necessitated by the fact that we're no longer collecting data exclusively at the census block level. We're asking providers just to send us in whatever they consider to be their coverage area. So that's a change. We're also asking providers to just send in their maximum advertised upload and download speeds as a number as opposed to as a speed tier. So we're going to provide access to that actual number that the providers are reporting. When you click someplace in the state, or you put in your address, the city or zip code on the left side. Thanks, Kelly. You get back a list of providers at that location. We're going to, in addition to that list of providers, why don't you click this so we get everybody? Turn on all the wireless and then click the location. Yeah, so when you click the map or you type in an address, you get a list of providers with speeds. It's still useful, we think, to use the speed tiers graphically for comparing those because we've got such a large range of speeds. But when you hover over individual providers, it'll tell the exact speed that they've reported. So that's one small change. We're also going to, on that little blurb that popped up, we're going to show the date that the providers last reported their coverage to us. So we're still going to ask for it about every 6 months. But if you want to give it to us more often, if you've got an update in a particular area, we'll try and get that on the map right away, and that'll be reflected in the date of last report that'll be shown on the map. And 2 more things. This is probably the biggest change of all. We've had one color on the map. We did that intentionally when we originally designed this to make it very clear what areas had coverage. So you didn't have to go to a legend to consult. You didn't have to consult a legend to figure out what you were looking at. The data filter on the right side, whatever you set that to, it was going to use the blue color to show you exactly what met that criteria. In the next release that we've got planned for the 5th anniversary of the map, we're going to give each of the technology groups its own color. So we'll have a color for mobile, we'll have a color for fixed wireless, and we'll have a color for wired technologies. And we'll allow the users to control those independently, to turn them off, turn them on, adjust the transparency, reorder them in terms of the draw order. And we think that will that'll provide just a little bit more insight. We like the one color, but we figured 3 isn't too much to throw at people, and that we can graphically show that in the interface so that it's very intuitive. The last thing that we're going to do to the map is that we're going to put as a default base map, instead of this aerial photography and roads layer, we're going to use a light gray base map, and we're going to highlight parts of the state on that base map that have populated areas. So whether it's economic activity, businesses, residential addresses, we're going to show that as a little darker area so that it's a little bit more intuitive, I guess, to use the word again, for folks that are seeing that the state isn't entirely covered by wireline technology, for example. So we'll let people discover the broadband landscape relative to where people actually work and live a little bit easier.
And we'll still have, I don't know if you know this, but there are different base maps, so if you ever want to switch base maps, so there'll still be a few base map options, but that'll be kind of the default. And we want to make it kind of as user-friendly as possible. So. And we're like amazed that it's been 5 years with the map. And so we're going to try and launch on the 5-year anniversary, I think, and send out a press release and do the whole thing. So, yeah.
We've been digging for that date. I think it was January 27th.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out the exact date. Okay, so I'll look through the blog.
We're proud that we beat the FCC in publishing their map.
Well, I did better than you. Nobody did better.
That's what I have. If you've got any comments, feedback right now, you take it or email works as well.
Well, and like Bert said, they're pretty minor changes, but it's a map that has worked very well for a long time, but there are a few things that we think we could do some tweaks to and improve a little bit. So we think it'll still serve the purpose that it has, but it'll be a little bit more intuitive.
put in an adequate dispute resolution. So if you're a customer or somebody that's, you know, wanting to question some of the data that's being sent public, is there any way to contact us to put in some sort of registered dispute?
Yeah, there actually is in the existing interface, and we've received one such dispute over the course of 5 years. I think that speaks to maybe it needs to be a little bit easier to find. But we also, I think, have gotten great data from the providers, and you know, where we've had questions, we've been able to have that conversation with the providers and figure out exactly what's going on. So, yeah, I think that's we've got to at least plan for that eventuality, but the reality is it hasn't happened a whole lot so far. But yeah, that's a good comment. Thank you for the compliments. Our map is very different than any of the things that the other states did, and I think it still works for the most part. So I'm excited about the new changes, and hopefully they don't degrade from what's already successful from the user interface standpoint. Was there a question back there? Yeah. So the question was, is it new having fixed and mobile together in wireless? Yeah, I think that we've had it this way for a long time. We tweaked it about 3 or 4 years ago, and the idea with the new map is that you'll be able to visually see them more independently and also control them. You can already control them independently if you want to, but yeah, we're going to group fixed wireless as one, wireline as another, and mobile wireless as a third. No, I checked it off before the presentation. Absolutely. No, I did that because if you turn them all on, you see that the state is largely covered by one technology or another, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that the map is more complex than just a big blob over the state of Utah. Good question. So Kelly's really telling us what to do here, so if you have more feedback, just get it to her, and she'll get out the whip and get us moving on it.
All right. Okay, so our next section of presentations I'm super excited for. We're going to have Doug Meredith talk about rate of return reforms, and then we're going to have Sharon Bertelsen talk about a few other federal updates. And we haven't had either of them present for a while, and they are very, very in the know and very smart, and hopefully they can dumb it down for some of us that aren't quite as smart.
Well, thank you, Kelly. And yes, it's been a while since we talked about universal service reform, so I wanted to start first giving you a brief background, about 5 minutes of history. So let's go back to Theodore Newton Vail, president of AT&T in the late 1800s, and up to 1920 when he died in Baltimore, Maryland. Before he passed away, he was active in trying to get a universal service system. This was not by any means a philanthropic enterprise. It was an attempt to monopolize telephone in the country, and his statement was one system, one provider, universal service. And that's where universal service originally started, was that this essentially this compact or this commitment by AT&T to provide service, telephone service to all that wanted it in the areas that AT&T served. The universal service was not really codified until 1996. But before 1996, there were many, many areas in the country, and All West is being one of them, where independent telephone companies were created because the Bell system did not want to serve those areas. They were not cost effective, and so they just didn't serve them. And so independent telephone companies began to serve these very high cost areas. And universal service implicitly existed through transfer payments from AT&T, long haul, and for well, really all of AT&T operations, to independent telephone companies through a very complex system of shared revenues, essentially. That eventually evolved into what we have now, which is a discrete system by the federal government. The FCC governs this operation of approximately $8 to $9 billion a year are being collected and dispersed for universal service. And universal service has actually been created, has evolved as well. We now have school and library programs that constitute about $4 billion of that $8 billion. And we also have a low-income program, Lifeline and Link-Up service, that is not only for basic telephone service, but also is now expanding into broadband. So you can actually use those credits. If you qualify as a low-income household, you can use federal universal service credits to offset a portion of your broadband, or offset a portion of your telephone bill, or you could use that as well as it's expanding into a broadband credit. Well, what I want to talk about today is the third piece of universal service is high cost support. This is the support that has had this long history since Theodore Vail started it. And in this particular sense, it's actually payments to help rural telephone companies, mostly, provide service to their areas because of their high-cost areas. And these particular programs are the high-cost universal service programs. There are several of them, and they are being reformed. The FCC, starting in 2010, in earnest, started reforming rural universal service. And the reforms are moving in a direction that I think this council would be very appreciative of, because they're moving toward a broadband-centric program, where broadband is really key in providing, in getting that particular service or broadband service out to customers and to make it affordable. Now, there are quite a few different things going on because we have this legacy program that has existed for many years. The FCC is trying to reform it, and it's turning into a situation where you're trying to replace a tire, a blown-out tire on your car going 60 miles an hour on the road. You know, it's very hard to change a wheel when you're doing that, but that's essentially what the FCC, that's the task they have to do, because they have to continue a legacy program and reform it so that it can transform into something what they think is more directed toward broadband. And they're doing this through a variety of mechanisms. One of them is a model, a forward-looking economic cost model called the Connect America model that is really a kind of a state-of-the-art model that tries to calculate the cost of providing service to every single location in the country. And it uses, in part, some of the 477 data that Kelly described a little bit earlier, to identify where there should be support given and where there shouldn't be support given. One of the primary directives of the FCC new program is that where there is competition, there shouldn't be support. And that's subject to quite a bit of debate internally in the industry, but that's really one of the prime touchstones by the FCC, is to say, if there's a competitor in an area, then that demonstrates that there's a financial case to be made that that competitor doesn't need that the underlying incumbent doesn't need support. There is a few nuances I do want to mention in that case, because the competitor might in fact be subsidizing him or herself through other operations, and so that area might not be self-sufficient or self-supporting. And then furthermore, the competitor doesn't have the obligation to provide service to anybody who comes. And so this carrier of last resort, or this provider of last resort concept, really doesn't get captured by the FCC in that concept. But at least the FCC is moving in that direction, and they do use and rely extensively on reforming, making a new program, a new offer for rural carriers to take a model and have a commitment to provide broadband support at 10-1 in the near future, and that near future is 10 years out. Now you're saying 10-1, come on, 10-1 is really nothing, and that's true, it is nothing. But if you raise it to 25-3 or to 110, then you run into a problem that your budget assigned to this project is totally, is much, much higher. And so as a result, the FCC essentially is taking baby steps. I guess we just have to be patient with that, using 10.1 in rural areas, whereas in Salt Lake City and other cities, you're getting gigabit service. There's a real concern about the digital divide, about whether rural areas are being left behind because of that particular policy. All of that will work out in the end, because the carriers mostly that are providing service for, deploying new infrastructure for doing this, a federal mandate, are using new technologies that can do much more than 10.1 in most areas. Although there are rural areas of rural Utah and the rural nation that 10.1 is even a stretch right now. So in that particular case, the FCC is trying to reform. They're trying to use best principles and best practices, and they have about $2 billion of that total budget is assigned to rural carriers. They also allow CenturyLink and other carriers, RBOX are what they call price cap carriers. That's another little category distinction that some carriers have. Most of the largest carriers of the country are of this classification, the price cap. And these carriers are also given some money, to the tune of about $1.8 billion, to provide service to areas where they serve, but they're not doing it very well. And so they actually can get broadband to more remote areas of the RBOC territory. And that process is moving along as well. So you can see, and what I want you to take away from this brief discussion is that the FCC's reforms are trying to move from essentially a universal service concept for what has been telephone for 100 years to a mechanism where they say broadband is just as important as telephone for the social fabric of the nation. And as a result, that's the direction they're going. And so it bodes well for a broadband council to be aware of these developments. States have kind of a patchwork of how they're dealing with and integrating with the universal service reforms at the federal level. Many states are kind of taking a wait and see approach to say, okay, let's figure out what the FCC is doing before we do anything. But there certainly needs to be a realignment for many states of older statutes that talk about telephone and realign that to the new reality that broadband is really where universal service needs to be in the 21st century. Are there any questions, comments? Yes?
All phone systems are going to internet, of course. So we need that.
You have phones, telephone service, telephone grade service. Carrier grade service is a little different. There's different varieties of voice over internet protocol. Using carrier grade has a more robust and it's a more independent network than if you just used a over-the-top internet voice service. But yes, everything is going to that direction.
Yes, now technology will take that over.
Yep.
Right now, are there any comments that you can comment on?
There's not comment, but there is something that's coming up within the next 6 weeks. The FCC is expected to release its order adopting this model that I was talking about for rate of return carriers to elect. It will be a voluntary election, and then there will be also some reforms that are too detailed for this forum, but reforms for legacy programs. That was anticipated to be on the schedule for the December 17th open meeting, but the agenda was released and it's not on the agenda, and that could change because it's a tentative agenda, but we should also be looking toward the end of January for an order on universal service reform for the rural carriers. With regard to Lifeline, the reform already occurred to actually change into a broadband, allowing a credit to be used for broadband. And the school and library this last year, and I don't think there's any open dockets for school and library, but there's certainly a boatload of money for school and library connectivity, and to try to meet the goal of getting all of the schools connected at very, very high speed. Other questions? Great. I'll turn it over to Sharon. Yes. Oh, the size of the total package? Yes. The universal service funds that are collected from the federal universal service surcharge that's applied to interstate and state, or interstate and international, I should say, telecommunications revenues, is collected and then dispersed. And it's dispersed. School and library has grown substantially. They just received almost double what they had before, up to about $4 billion. And the high cost support has actually stayed at or is going lower. And the Lifeline or the low income programs have increased substantially in the past, and they've tapered off a little bit because the FCC has dealt with duplication and fraud, waste, and abuse in those particular programs. Does that answer kind of the general concept as far as things moving? The high cost program that rural carriers in Utah employ to provide a support for their service is stable or declining over time. Correct, and that follows the political winds. Yes, it does.
Is there something in written form that you've discussed that we can get at?
Yes, the Universal Service Administrative Company, USAC.org, has background on all of the programs that I've described, the low income, the school and library, and the high cost programs. And you can read to your heart's content on that particular website. But it's accessible. It's accessible. The brief program overviews are there, and so you could get a better handle on that.
And if there's ever anything that you want me to disseminate to the group that you're reading, you can send that on blog. We try to keep on top of all these commentaries and stuff that's going on, so you know it's
Okay, great.
Cannot hear that speaker.
Wondering, when do you think you'll know, when will all of the rural companies finally know how they're actually interested?
Yeah, that's a good question because we've been kind of in this limbo for at least 5 years, since 2010, 2011. The rural carriers, the rate of return carriers that are impacted by these upcoming reforms. Let me say the expectation is that a number of them will know what is going on with their operations by the end of quarter, next first quarter in 2016. And then there's probably some additional legacy reforms that will carry on through 2016. So mid to end 2016, there should be a much clearer picture of what the reforms and how the reforms affect carriers. But there will be an election, a voluntary election for certain carriers if they want to choose this particular model to support, for support. That election is expected to happen first quarter 2016 with some operational date maybe mid-year. So that's kind of what's going on. Question? Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss a few additional FCC issues that are important to wireless broadband moving forward. I'm going to briefly cover incentive auctions, the FCC's 600 megahertz band plan, the FCC's open internet rules, and then also broadband privacy protections. What is an incentive auction? It's a voluntary market-based means of repurposing spectrum. And it's very different from the traditional spectrum auctions. I was the assistant CEO of one of the auctions at the FCC, and at that time, the FCC would come out with an order, and it would be mandatory, and then the competitive bidding procedures would come out, and the auction would happen. Well, in this case, there are actually two different auctions. The first is an auction of the broadcasters of their spectrum rights. The second is an auction of the rights that the FCC acquired through that auction to providers of wireless broadband service. And this is from Congress. In 2012, they passed the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act. We all refer to it as the Spectrum Act, authorizing the FCC to conduct the incentive auctions. The auction is organized into a series of stages. Each stage of the auction will consist first of a reverse auction to determine the amount of compensation that each broadcast television licensee would accept in return for relinquishing their spectrum rights, and then a forward auction. Within each auction, there will be rounds of bidding, and in each round of bidding, the prices will either decline in the case of the reverse auction, or go up in the case of the forward auction. The FCC will set an initial clearing target, and they're going to do that by announcing opening bidding prices, which they already have, and then see which broadcasters register for the auction. Then the FCC will decide, based on the level of participation, how much spectrum the FCC will seek to buy from the broadcasters, and therefore how much spectrum they will have to auction in the forward stage. The FCC has something called the first stage rule, which will determine when the auction closes and whether the FCC has recouped in the forward auction the sufficient funds to pay the broadcasters, but then also cover the expense of the auction. Yay. A lot of focus has been on the broadcaster's option to relinquish their channel at the auction, but Congress actually required 3 different options for the broadcasters in the Spectrum Act. One is the broadcasters would get into the reverse auction, relinquish their spectrum, give the FCC their 6 megahertz, they would go dark, and then take their money, and that would be it. The second option is a channel sharing option, and the third option is moving from a UHF, which is ultra high frequency channel, to VHF, which is very high frequency channel. Under the channel sharing, a broadcaster would relinquish its existing 6 megahertz channel in the reverse auction, but then instead of going dark, they would remain on the air and share a channel with another broadcaster. For example, before the auction, in this case, can you see everybody? Channel 21 and Channel 49 are separately licensed on 6 megahertz channel. Under the channel sharing arrangement, Channel 49 would tender its spectrum in the reverse auction, and the FCC would acquire it. And then the licensee of Channel 49 would retain its license to broadcast, but they would be broadcasting on Channel 21 along with the existing licensee of Channel 21. The FCC adopted certain rules to make this happen and to permit the channel sharing to occur. Beyond that, beyond the rules that the FCC set, the allocation of the capacity on each of the shared channels would be subject to agreement between the parties. So it's not as though they take the 6 megahertz and say, okay, you take 3 megahertz and you take 3. It's really a capacity sharing arrangement that they come up with, and it can vary day by day, so that one licensee may have a sporting event where they need more capacity, and the other one may just have talking heads on a talk show, and they would need less capacity, and it can change. So this agreement between the parties would cover financial, operational, and also the technical arrangements with the channel sharing. And from the FCC's perspective, the channel sharing is almost identical to complete relinquishment because it means that the FCC acquires the full 6 megahertz of the first licensee. It's given back but instead of going off the air, again, they're taking that license, porting it over to another channel, and the licensee receives payment, although the licensee will probably have to share some of the proceeds with their channel sharing partner, which is Channel 21 in this case. There's been a lot of interest in this, particularly among public broadcasters and commonly owned broadcasters in the same market, and there have been a lot of trials out there where the trials are demonstrating the feasibility of the channel sharing.
You could get 4.1 and 4.2 and 4.3. Those 0.2 and 0.3 could be shared with the other broadcasters. So that although they're using the same 6 megahertz channel, each one gets a separate sub-channel.
So remember that the third option is to move from UHF to the VHF band. And the benefit to the broadcasters,
I believe it's moving from the VHF to the UHF.
UHF to VHF. Okay, listen and then tell me if you want to add something. So the benefit to the broadcaster is very similar to the channel sharing, but the payment is a little bit different. So here the broadcaster would tender its 6 megahertz in the UHF band, and the FCC would have the spectrum for repurposing, but instead of paying the broadcaster in cash, the FCC would provide a combination of cash and another 6 megahertz in the VHF band. The goal of the reverse auction, remember, is to clear the UHF band. So, for example, in this case, the broadcaster could go from channel 50 to channel 7 and get a payment for the high VHF. The FCC proposes that 50% of the money the broadcaster would get from going off the air completely, because the broadcaster would still be getting something in trade in addition to the cash. So if the broadcaster goes to a low VHF channel, the FCC proposes a larger cash payment because of the greater technical challenges for digital broadcasting in the lower VHF band. This option allows the broadcaster to stay on the air, tender its UHF spectrum for payment, but receive another 6 megahertz channel. So once the FCC has determined which broadcasters are going to participate and which broadcasters are going to remain on the air, those that did not participate or those that did enter into the auction but ultimately dropped out because the price that the FCC is offering dropped too low for their interest, then the FCC has to repack those broadcasters into a smaller portion of the band. The essence of the auction is really to take the UHF channels across the UHF band from channels 21 to 51, buy as many as the FCC needs in each market to create this contiguous block of spectrum for re-auction, and then repack the remaining stations into a smaller portion of the 600 band, which is where the broadcasters are today, so that all broadcasters who elect to remain on the air can do so without any change in their coverage area or the population served. This gives a better sense of the factors that the FCC will have to take into account in moving the TV stations to other channels. For example, the FCC could take the station that is on channel 50, since this is in the upper part of the band where the FCC will certainly want to reconfigure the 600 megahertz band. And then from channel 50, they can move down to a lower channel, such as channel 21. In summary, the FCC relocates the station down the band, preserves the population served, preserves the coverage area, and replicates the service contour with hopefully no greater interference than it had at its original channel. Following the repacking process, how is the FCC going to rearrange the 600 megahertz band? The FCC settled on what they call a down from 51 plan, which means starting from channel 51, which is the highest UHF channel right now, and moving down from 51, the FCC would take the spectrum that was reclaimed and reallocate it into paired blocks, an uplink and a downlink block, which enables the two-way communication. And they would be auctioned together. So two 5 megahertz blocks, the total is 10 megahertz, would be auctioned in the forward auction to the wireless broadband providers. The FCC adopted a flexible design because they don't really know how many broadcasters are going to tender their spectrum. The FCC came up with this approach in which they will decide the final band plan based on broadcaster participation after seeing how much spectrum they have to repurpose. The band plan can accommodate variations in the amount of spectrum recovered in the different geographic areas, and this will prevent what they call the least common denominator. So it'll allow more spectrum for wireless across the country in different markets. To give you a sense of how the band plan will look, I tried to provide an example here. So it starts on the right-hand side, and from the edge of 700 megahertz uplink. And depending on how much spectrum the FCC will get, in this example, it's 72 megahertz from broadcasters. So that would come out to 12 blocks of 6 megahertz each, 12 channels. And the FCC would reconfigure the band in a way that's depicted here. So there would be the 11 megahertz right here and here. There's 11 megahertz duplex gap and a guard band. The FCC would also has also determined that this 11 megahertz duplex gap, which is which will be used for unlicensed use so long as there's no interference. And there's channel 37, which is currently used for wireless medical telemetry and radio astronomy, will be available for fixed on wireless use as well. The FCC tried to, when they were repurposing this band, they tried to accommodate some of the unlicensed demand on a national basis. And that's also to be used for wireless microphones, so long as there's no interference. As far as the post-auction transition, for those broadcasters who elect not to participate in the auction or who are not chosen, they will have up to 39 months to actually move to their new channel. For the broadcasters that have chosen to participate, they have up to 3 months to get off the air after they get paid. And then there's one other thing that Congress created a fund. It's called the TV Broadcaster Relocation Reimbursement Fund. For those licensees who are involuntarily moved, they can apply to the fund to get to help with reimbursement on equipment that they need for the move. So where are we in this process? The FCC is still in the pre-auction process. In May of 2014, the FCC adopted a report and order establishing general rules, and then in July, they adopted the competitive bidding procedures. So far this year, the FCC released an information packet for broadcasters. They've had a lot of FCC webinars. Several information sessions have been conducted across the country. And they've also done an inventory to update, a technical inventory, I would say, to update their FCC database. So station facilities that are eligible for protection, they've submitted their forms that will be used. It's called technical certification forms to make sure that the FCC database is correct moving forward. And the FCC has initiated a number of proceedings that address where they have carved out separate issues, for example, setting interference standards. The FCC has also issued several public notices. I brought the two most recent ones with me, covering the most recent ones. There was one in October covering the application procedures, how to qualify, and then also the most recent one in November talks about opening prices for the reverse auction, and they have all of the markets, separated. Okay. Now for a controversial issue here. On February 26, 2015, the FCC adopted the Open Internet Rules, and they became effective on June 12th. The FCC established 3 bright line rules as far as prohibiting practices that are known to harm the Internet. 1, no blocking. Broadband providers may not block access to legal content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices. Number 2 is no throttling. Broadband providers may not impair lawful Internet traffic on the basis of content, application, services, or non-harmful devices. And 3, no paid prioritization. In other words, no fast lanes. The broadband providers may not favor some lawful Internet traffic over other lawful Internet traffic in exchange for money or consideration. For practices that fall outside of these 3 bright line rules, then the FCC has set a legal standard. The FCC can prohibit practices on a case-by-case basis that unreasonably interfere or disadvantage the ability of consumers to access the Internet. The FCC also talks about transparencies and disclosures that have to be made by broadband providers. So this open Internet order is controversial because many believe that the FCC is stretching its statutory authority when they, as if they're trying to regulate the Internet. Under the Communications Act of 1934, as amended by the 1996 Telecom Act, Congress gave the FCC authority to regulate in specific areas of communications, specific types of communications, I should say. Telecommunication services under Title II of the Act, broadcast, TV radio, commercial radio, mobile radio services under Title III, and cable television under Title VI. As legal authority for this open Internet order, the FCC relied on Title II of the Act and also Section 706 of the 1996 Telecom Act. So in this order, the FCC reclassified broadband Internet service as a telecommunications service that is subject to the requirements of Title II, and further declared that mobile Internet access is a commercial mobile service. So as part of the decision, the FCC decided to refrain or forbear from enforcing certain provisions of Title II that are not relevant to broadband service. According to the FCC and their justification, the rules will encourage broadband deployment, as Congress directed in Section 706, by encouraging innovation, therefore increasing demand, and then therefore having the broadband service providers improve their network capacity, et cetera. Title II is the same regulatory classification of basic telephone service, which traditionally has been heavily regulated. So many people argue that the FCC is attempting to regulate the Internet in a way that it regulated telephone wires. And they're concerned that if subjected to this oversight, the ISPs will be less inclined to invest in their networks and et cetera. So various parties filed petitions, as you all probably know or have guessed, and they're in the appellate courts at this point. So eyes are on the appellate court. In different courts, what's been done, though, is that the challenges have all been consolidated or transferred to the D.C. Circuit. There are also discussions of legislative solutions. And at the same time, we have in January 2017 a new party, or I shouldn't say that, a new president would take control of the White House, possibly a new party, and possibly a new, they could also change the makeup of the FCC and its commissioners. So obviously we haven't heard the last on this issue.
So Sharon, the oral arguments are tomorrow, actually. In the appellate court.
In the D.C. Circuit.
Yes. Get your popcorn ready.
Yeah, should be interesting. And then, this is, my last slide. I really thought it was important to go to the next slide. Yes. Please. To cover, broadband privacy, because, the FCC's open an internet order, because, the FCC reclassified broadband, internet service as a telecommunications service, then it's subject to the requirements of Title II, which means that broadband providers are reclassified as common carriers. In the order, the FCC states that Section 222 of the Communications Act applies to broadband internet access service providers. Among the other protections, Section 222 imposes a duty on every telecommunications carrier to protect the confidentiality of its customers, what's referred to as CPNI. So it's those customers' private information. They have restrictions on the carrier's use of, disclosure and transfer of that information without the consent of the customer. So the FCC is applying the core customer privacy requirements or protections that are in Section 222 to broadband providers. And they're expected to take reasonable, good faith steps to comply with Section 2, which includes having an effective privacy policy and then enforcing it. So most people know, here's the tricky part, that the Federal Trade Commission enforces online consumer privacy protections. And there's a little-known provision in the Federal Trade Commission law. It's called the Common Carrier Exemption, which gives the FCC exclusive authority over telephone services or telecommunication services. Now that the ISPs are considered common carriers, they could be out of reach of the FTC enforcement. And there are several Federal Trade Commission privacy and data security cases that are stemming from online practices or mobile practices. And the issue is whether the FCC open internet order would change the FTC's ability to then enforce their long-standing online consumer privacy protections, and whether the ISPs will be subject to privacy regulation and enforcement from the FCC instead of the more experienced FTC. And I'm sure you are all aware that there are other regulators at the federal level that regulate or provide guidance on privacy protections. For example, the Department of Health and Human Services, they are responsible for enforcing HIPAA. Department of Energy addresses privacy issues as it relates to smart grid. And even the Securities and Exchange Commission is getting into the privacy area. They've said that a company's board of directors, under their corporate governance role, would be required to oversee the risk of cybersecurity and take action. So the bottom line is, it appears that the Federal Trade Commission is working with the Federal Communications Commission on the privacy issue. So we'll just stay tuned and I'll report back.
Okay. So that's the reason.
Sorry, did I run out of time?
I think we're great. Yeah, I think we're great.
Okay.
Great report.
Yeah, there's a lot of content today, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of overwhelming, all the balls that are up in the air everywhere.
Privacy and data security, I think, is so important right now, and you'll see a lot of that going into the next year, I think, and everyone wants to get into the business, I think.
Okay, awesome.
Because it's so important.
Yes?
Yes.
Please. Could you put the mic by you, please?
Thank you. About 30 years ago, in major metropolitan areas, part of this band was reallocated for public safety. It's called the T-band.
Heard of it.
A television channel band, specifically Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, major metropolitan areas that could not get any additional public safety spectrum for the land mobile radio.
I assume this is part of that, and I guess my question becomes then, how do these public safety entities move from the existing television channel they use now for mobile radio communications to some new spectrum or some new place, and do it in a timely manner to meet the timeline as expressed in these public notices? There's a lot of concern in the public safety community about that. Luckily, we in Utah don't have to deal with that issue, but I can guarantee you that my colleagues in Boston and Los Angeles are very concerned about what they're going to do and how they're going to fund the move to support their police, fire, and EMS operations. So.
And I think these issues continue to be more and more important with wireless, with public safety, with like all the devices we're starting to wear all the time. I mean, and it's the spectrum being like a limited resource, trying to figure out how to make it work for all these different applications. It's just a really complicated process. Any other questions? Okay, so our next item of business, we're going to do an update from the Youth Agitation Network. Dennis, you want to come up here? Do you have any slides?
No, I don't have any slides. If everybody's comfortable just seeing where you're at. Oh, they can't see you?
Yeah, would you come up here?
No, I can come up there.
That would actually be great.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to give a brief report today. One of the things we wanted to share with you all, last legislative session, the Utah State Legislature passed Senate Bill 222, the Digital Teaching and Learning Program. As part of that legislation, they asked UETN to conduct an engineering study in all the K-12 public schools, and also do an inventory of all the assets in terms of technology and learning. And so we undertook this summer a process to issue 2 RFPs, one to hire an engineering firm to go out and start to do a study on infrastructure, Wi-Fi, content filtering, a lot of things that we do as a regular part of our organization, and working with the districts and schools and charter schools across the state, as well as we hired Connected Nation to go out and do a comprehensive inventory survey and report of all the assets that are being used, iPads, laptops, infrastructure within schools, and it was a very aggressive time frame for us. We're just kind of wrapping up a lot of that work this month. I can tell you our preliminary engineering reports are coming out, and we're doing some peer reviews with some of our peers around the country, with like Phoenix and MCNC and FRGP out of Colorado, as far as the content of the engineering studies. And we've got some great comments so far. We had a call yesterday with several of our peers, and some great recommendations. I can tell you a little bit, just give you a preview, and we'll be able to give a more full report next time, Kelly, on some of the results of that. But just to give you a flavor of how many different types of Wi-Fi solutions are out in schools now, there are 14 different types of solutions that we've identified, at least manufacturers, to give you an idea of the autonomy that schools obviously have and the solutions they've implemented. So I think one of the things that we're going to be working on is how do you standardize or kind of come around common standards of different types of learning environments for schools, those that are on small enterprise, those are kind of medium enterprise, and those are large enterprises. So that's kind of the work that we're doing in the engineering field right now. As far as the inventory study, that's been a massive effort. We've had Connected Nation has brought in teams locally to go throughout the state and actually go boots on the ground for people to go into schools and help assist larger districts to go and actually inventory learning devices, classroom capabilities, and we're hoping to complete that work by the end of this month and give you all the more comprehensive report on that. Just to tell you, Connected Nation went up and did this in Alaska, at least did a broadband survey in Alaska. We were very impressed with the work they did, and some of the lessons they learned, and what they were able to bring into Utah. I mean, going into some of those communities, and they're based in schools in some very remote communities in Alaska. There's a lot of parallels in Utah as well. So work's going well in that area. Rick, I don't know if you want to comment on a lot of the work that we did with the Digital Teaching and Learning Task Force, and the State Office of Education approved the Digital Teaching and Learning Master Plan in October. It's called the Essential Elements for Technology-Powered Learning. You can all find a copy of that on the UEN website. It's uen.org digital, digital dash learning, where you'll find all the reports from all the work that everybody has done. And Rick's done a great job helping lead the effort from the State Office of Education in terms of the overall plan. And I know you've made 2 presentations to the legislature. Maybe something further, maybe next time we can go more in detail. The bottom line is has been put together, implemented. We feel it's a very good plan, and it's well received by the board.
Is someone speaking? Can't hear.
Yeah. So the plan has been well received. I think it, as you'll be able to go into it, it provides the schools structure, but also flexibility. It's really hard to bring those 2 together. With a timeline, that would begin implementing, after the bill passes and gets funding. It's a qualifying grant program so that all LEAs, districts and charter schools, will be able to participate based upon submitting an application that is approved. So those are some of the high-level highlights. Thanks, Rick. I just tell you from my perspective too. I think it's the first. A lot of states are looking to what Utah is doing. A lot of the firms that we're working with, in terms of our consultants, work nationally, and saying there's a lot of eyes on Utah in terms of this plan and how it goes. And it's kind of the first to jump in, full, feet first into this kind of a state master plan for all of education. So I'm excited about the plan. I think there's been a lot of great work. The main thing, as Rick said, is how much support we'll get from the legislature this year. But just in comparison, the legislation for Senate Bill 222 last year, I can't remember how many pages it, Rick, was it maybe around, went through 41 versions before the final bill passed. This year's legislation we've been working on with the legislature is probably 4 pages total, and refers to the master plan. So I think there's some reason to believe there's a lot of support for it, and we're hoping it will go forward. As far as UETN's participation in that plan, we submitted our budget request to support the infrastructure needs it will take to implement the plan, and we projected around, I think, $5.3 million of ongoing funding, about $2.6 million of one-time funds that would be required to improve, our network to support the additional capacity and load that it would take to improve learning environments in the full one-to-one environment. And so, as part of our plan, we also see opportunities for economies of scale with a statewide digital learning management system like Canvas. I think we requested $1 million ongoing for that. And then I can tell you a little bit about our legislative request overall. This is independent of the Digital Teaching and Learning Program.
we've requested $5.7 million of ongoing funding separate from the plan. I mean, this is UEN's structural needs in terms of just supporting the growth and activities on the network with $5.2 million of one-time funding. And if there's anything else that there is one other project I think we should spend a little bit of time talking about, and I know Shirley, you've been involved. Unfortunately, Jeff Egley couldn't be here today, but Dave and Brock, I know you guys. We've talked to Strata Networks and Emory Telecom, but one of the things that we know that in Daggett County and San Juan County, UEN's supported a microwave system to the schools and the clinics out in those areas for a long time. We're looking for the opportunities to leverage the E-rate program, the modernization dollars. There's an additional 10% state matching program that's going to be available this year and next year for broadband build-out to try and get fiber into these communities. We've been contacted by Daggett County Information Services. There's a clinic in Manila that's really struggling in terms of their bandwidth needs. We go out in areas like Navajo Nation and Navajo Mountain, San Juan, Montezuma Creek. We'd really like to get a public-private partnership going with UETN and some of our service providers to build out fiber into these areas. And as part of that, we're looking to develop a funding plan so that we can leverage those E-rate funds. We talked to Lynn Yoakum at UDOT about UDOT taking a strong role in this project. I don't know if you guys have any comments, Brock or Dave, from your perspective, but I know you guys have interest to get this done as well.
Strata Networks, we've been providing information to Deb LaMarche on this project, and we've already got a project that's planned for a portion of the route, but not the complete route. So we're working with her to try to figure out how to make that all come together. But I don't really have a whole lot of concrete information right now, but it is something we're working on.
Good. Well, we do have an RFP issued out there right now, and we're optimistic working with Kelly and Lynn and the partners in this that I think if we can work together and identify the right funding resources and have UETN as an anchor tenant, this actually could work. And these are very underserved areas. As you know, the clinic in Manila contacted us and working with Deb and Mars, and they're really struggling. They have a 5 DSL connection, and they want to take advantage of some of the more services that UETN can provide, and it's just not capable right now, and so we're looking at ways to help them and work together in this partnership. So we appreciate your participation in that. And then finally, I know Sabrina's on the phone. We're aggressively working towards the E-rate modernization changes, the program changes with E-rate. As you know, the FCC and USAC has implemented these new changes, and so we're anticipating a very challenging year in terms of our E-rate program. But I don't know if you have any comments, Sabrina, you'd like to share with the group.
No, just maybe expand on what you've already said, and it's really challenging. USAC is implementing a new portal system, and it's not going very smoothly. I heard a rumor that they were anticipating opening the application filing window the second week of January, but I haven't talked to a single person that believes that's possible, given all of the issues that we've identified and are continuing to work on with USAC. So we're accommodating the new rules and the new system to the extent possible. As Dennis mentioned, we've got a few RFPs out on the street now, and have incorporated them into the new system, which we have to do this year. But it does highlight some related issues regarding USAC, overall USAC administration, not just of the E-rate program, but universal service in general. So there's an ongoing discussion right now with the petition for rulemaking in the rural health care program, for example. Hopefully we're going to discuss it further internally today. Not much more to add other than we have some serious challenges just dealing with the data issues and the IT issues that USAC has given us.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. And one last comment about our merger with the Utah Telehealth Network. We continue to have a lot of discussions about merging the infrastructures and the support technologies around what UTN does and what UEN does, and UEN as an organization. And we do have 4 clinics out there right now in our current RFP that we're looking to actually put on the UEN backbone to help that process. And so we see that evolution continue to go, and working with Deborah Marsh and the UTN team are going really well. So any comments for UTN? Questions that we can address? Well, I think the $50 million would go to the local education agencies, the schools and school districts. Would be administered as part of the digital teaching and learning program. The new legislation would have a task, well, I guess it's advisory council, right, Rick, that would administer that program. UETN's asked of that. Ours is separate from the $50 million. Ours is about 5.3 ongoing just to support the infrastructure to, support it. I don't think the master plan really defines what kind of devices districts need to use. Is that right, Rick? More
the master plan covers, as you'll see, it covers all elements from leadership and change management through professional learning, and the funds can be used in all of these areas. Then you get into infrastructure to support devices, and then you start looking at content software, devices, technical support. We'll also be dealing with state procurement to leverage economies of scale. And the money that we're asking from the legislature is only a part of the actual total cost. We anticipate, really to do an initiative like this statewide, all grade levels, all students, you really would probably looking at more like $300 to $400 million. So we're asking for about, maybe a fourth to a third of the total cost. Districts would have to continue, or LEAs would have to continue to leverage their own, continue to, do their own spending. So when you come back to what kind of devices, yes, and yes, because it could be any or all or a mix, or it could be devices that are going home, which would increase the need for home capacity, or they may not be going home. We leave a lot of that flexibility to the local LEAs.
Yeah, we'll actually be able to report next time on what the current status of everything is. Like, we anticipate hopefully about 100% of the districts and quite a lot of the charter schools, maybe not all the charter schools, because there's so many now. I think we have over 120 charter schools that connect to UEN now. But be able to get an idea of like what's out there and what people are using effectively. So that should be important next time.
Oh, and I wanted to mention the agenda that I sent out said that the next meeting will be February 11th, and I actually just this morning moved it to February 18th. There was a conflict with, what was the meeting? It was a cable, so we felt, it was free, we just moved it back a week.
So the next one is
February 18th. So that's a correction, on the schedule. But, so one of our last items before we do we'll wrap up with maps of the month, but we wanted to do FirstNet update. So if Steve and Gordon would like to come up, that'd be great.
A little handout here that I put together just from some FirstNet slides from our last SPOC meeting. Just give you a quick update on where FirstNet is with the National Public Broadband Network, Public Safety Broadband Network. So since the September 30th deadline on the data submissions, they've received submissions from 54 of the 56 states and territories. And I think there's 7 federal agencies that also reported. There's probably right around 55,000 public safety entities in that, representing about 1.6 million personnel. So FirstNet's looking to extrapolate that out, because that's only like about 3.7% of the public safety entities in the country that reported. So they're looking at possibly 4 to 5 million personnel, maybe more. They're not sure yet. Since that data's been collected, they reviewed it. They had some questions, so they called and contacted every one of the states that had submitted entries. Got clarifications on those. So now, right now, what they're doing is they're aggregating that data and getting it prepared to put into the RFP. So on the next page, their RFP, they're still planning on releasing that end of December, first part of January. They'll take question and answer period through February of 2016, and then they're looking to get the proposals back from the vendors by May of 2016. So during the whole year of 2016, they're going to conduct another round of state consultations. They're going to meet with every one of the states, and they're anticipating that to take the entire calendar year of 2016. During those consultations, they're just going to be talking with the states and preparing the state plan that's going to go to the governor eventually. And that plan will be what the governor will see to make his decision to opt in or opt out of FirstNet's process. So whether to have FirstNet build the state RAN or have the state build it. They're anticipating the state plans will be ready to give to the governors first or second quarter of 2017. So we've got a little bit of time still before governors see that. So our process through the next year is to work with FirstNet to educate governance bodies for the public safety communication systems in each state. For us, the UCA board would be involved with that. And then to educate the governor's office and his staff on what's going on with FirstNet, so when he gets this state plan that FirstNet's going to present, that he's aware of it and he's ready to make a decision on that, so he's not blindsided by it. So there's a list of things here that are tentative here for the consultation over the next year. We're waiting for FirstNet to send us out a package to tell us, with the SPOC package, to give us an idea of what's going on for the next year. So we'll get that, and we'll have a SPOC kickoff meeting sometime during January and February of next year. And then they're going to plan governance body meetings. They're going to put together some consultation task teams to talk about some of the things that we're doing. And it's vague right now. We haven't got any of this from them yet, so I'm not sure what they're requiring yet. So, and then probably the third and fourth quarter of 2016 is when they'll want to meet with the governor's office and talk about this with them, and get them educated on that. Last page here is just some consultation milestones, some swim lanes, and how everything kind of lines up between now and first part of 2017. That's where FirstNet is at the moment. There's some other issues that are involved with that. I think Steve's going to address that, so I'll leave that for him. Any questions from anybody on FirstNet?
It's good. It's green.
Good.
Yeah, green's good.
Okay, thanks. I'm colorblind, so whether it's green or red, I don't know. Just a couple of other notes with respect to what Gordy reported on. Just to make sure everybody's clear, FirstNet is a federal independent agency established by the federal government under the direction of NTIA that will be building this network. Our part of this is just to coordinate that effort for the state of Utah and the governor of the state of Utah, who will make a decision whether to build our own network or procure services from the FirstNet network. I think there's been a little unclarity about that. Knowing what we know now, I would recommend that we just let FirstNet build the network and we be one of their, we buy their service from them as opposed to owning, maintaining, upgrading, and building our own network. That seems to just be a huge onerous task. The initial build out for Utah and most of the other states starts with a 5-phase program. The first phase will only cover about 20% of the population, so we know where that's going to be. It's going to be the Wasatch Front, obviously. And this is a cost recovery network, so when you get on the network, even though it's public safety, you will pay to use the network, much like you pay to use for these similar devices. And again, our part of this is just to coordinate this FirstNet and make sure that Utah's needs are met.
Gordy mentioned that about 3% of the public safety entities responded in the nation. In Utah, it was 14%, so we almost tripled the response of the rest of the nation. And over this next year, again, we'll be adding more information for them. On a second note, the Utah Communications Authority has an RFP out on the street for two pieces of telecommunications. One is a public safety radio system replacement, and the second piece is the backhaul to help us control that replacement and to expand the existing footprint out to cover all the entities in the state. It's in an RFI format right now, and it's available on the state's BidSync website. And comments are being taken on that RFI until December the 11th, which is 8 days from today. And then we will take those comments into consideration and issue the formal RFP January the 8th of next year. And there will be a proposers conference tentatively scheduled for the end of January. And then the proposal submission deadline will be May of next year, May 10th of next year. And this information is all on the UCA.org website, and you can take a look at that. The board passed a resolution forwarding this process forward yesterday, or Tuesday. That's our report.
Okay, perfect. Any questions before we move on to Bert? Great. I don't know.
Let's go on. Okay, we'll roll with it. So we've come to the near end of the agenda, and the spot where I traditionally kind of introduce the Map of the Month series that we've done. We've had these online, and we're running late on time, so I'm more or less going to rip through these and enter them into the record for your future perusal. Steve Proctor mentioned that FirstNet is being planned as sort of a 5-phase build-out. Our Map of the Month in October took the baseline that FirstNet created nationally. They clipped it to the state of Utah, sent it to UCA, and they gave all states the option of refining that and submitting it back in by September 30th. And so AGRC was asked by UCA to work on this and to take their relatively simple, elementary, little bit misguided, especially in the rural areas, baseline, and refine that into something that made more sense to the state of Utah in terms of this 5-phase build-out. So the October Map of the Month is essentially the data that we sent through UCA, or UCA sent to FirstNet, which kind of shows what the state thinks would be a more reasonable approach to that build-out plan. And we significantly expanded the coverage particularly in the first phase. FirstNet has proposed in their baseline more or less a Wasatch Front only build-out. We expanded that to a Logan and Tremont and St. George along the I-15 corridor with Wasatch Front and back as first phase. Second phase picks up the Uinta, Duchesne County US 40 corridor, as well as the US 6 and 191 corridor down to Castledale and Moab. And then in phase 3, every single county seat is connected back to the Wasatch Front through this coverage objective. And I think it's important to note that this is not what the coverage would look like. This is just a statement of what the coverage objectives are, and as we build out wireless service, of course, the footprint ends up being larger than that. So this Map of the Month is a little bit of a write-up on that process, how we put different map layers together that we had for the state between populated places and community anchor institutions, transportation, the traffic volumes that the highway network was seeing. So lots of information there, and a map to look at as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
Fine. So that was October. September was more of an exercise. One of the things that was mentioned at a previous meeting of the advisory committee is it would be nice to have a map resource of all the existing communication sites, and particularly in the rural areas and up on the mountaintops and the forests. And we put together an interactive map that let I think we had about 15 people editing it at once, and we used the high-resolution aerial photography that we have for the state, the 6-inch imagery we licensed from Google, together with a number of other data sets that were available online, different pieces of the equation from the FCC, from some crowdsourced data that was online, the information that BLM had given us in terms of what areas, little blocks of the state they'd licensed for communication facilities. We spent an hour of, I think it was 15 people's time, and we saw how far we could get with that, using all the evidence that we had in the different sources to go in and confirm, yep, there's something there, and put a dot on top of it. Really, I think that the most interested folks who participated in this were the folks who fight the wildland fires and the Division of Emergency Management. They had a couple of staff that participated. We haven't finished this yet. We've finished a number of counties. We're going to try and finish it by the end of the year, get back to it, spend another maybe 15, 20 hours on it, and develop this data set. And
how many did we get done in an hour? So we did a
about
combined
500,
hour,
I think.
and we found 500 tower sites in an hour.
Yeah, and there are resources out there. They're not resources that we can use in our own systems and share within sort of the constituency that we have. And none of them, not a single one of them is complete. And so the idea was, could we go in, verify, complete this with a relative minor amount of effort on our part. So we should be finishing that up by the end of the year. Describes that process. The November map of the month was basically take the commercial fiber service that's available in locate.utah.gov and displays it as a standalone map. We received updates from a number of providers as a result of the broadband coverage submission and actual direct updates to this data set. So the map of the month for November is the hexagons, the 1 kilometer wide hexagon cells that providers have indicated to us. They have short order fiber available for business, or custom order fiber, which was defined as something that was more like in the 6 to 9 month time frame. And this does include the most recent updates. More of County are lit up in this map, as well as areas in San Juan. That's how I know I'm looking at the most current version of this, because I've seen service grow in different parts of the state, but in particular, those are the ones that have been reported that jump out at me as sort of a non-informed data consumer.
Does commercial here mean service to commercial customers, or does it mean not municipal?
It means there's fiber in the ground. So what it means essentially is that there's fiber there that could be accessed within that hexagon, and depending on if they felt it was like a 1 to 3 month time period, or it has nothing to do with the customer. It's just the infrastructure is in the ground.
Actually, I would say that slightly differently. I would say it doesn't have to do with municipal ownership versus commercial ownership.
Yeah.
This is
the
target audience is the business community that wants to know where in the state can I find a fiber provider. So, a couple of folks asked for this, so we thought it would be good to pull it out of the application and just have it be a standalone map, and it's something that's fairly easy for us to keep updated over time as we receive additional updates from providers.
And if you want to explore it, obviously the locate.gov site helps you dive in a little bit more into detail and run reports on various areas. So if you're interested in a particular area, you just click and it'll generate a list of providers that you can contact.
The last thing I'll mention is at the bottom of any of the map of the month posts, if you're looking at one, you can go down to the tags and click on map of the month, and it will give you access to all of the map of the month posts that have been generated over the months.
Okay.
That's what we got.
Wow, we're like right on time. Okay, well, thank you. We had a ton of information. And did anybody else have any questions, comments, announcements before we kind of wrap up? Otherwise, we'll see you. Our next meeting, like I said, February 18th. And as has been our tradition, that'll be in the Capitol boardroom at the state capitol. For those of you that are already up there for the legislative session, I think it's a little bit easier for people, even though the parking's a little bit of a mess, but you can at least, a lot of people will be up there for various reasons. So it'll be in the Capitol boardroom February 18th from noon to 2, and I think we'll probably have lunch there too. So that's it. Thank you.